much. Thank you very much for joining us. This is day 2 of live stream sessions that we are having to engage our stakeholders. The intent is to provide information as well as the questions that are coming in, help us ensure, in many cases, confirm that many of the things that we are planning on doing are being addressed, as well as to help ensure that we're thinking about all the nuances to ensure that we can implement a plan that meet the needs of our students and maximize our staff. I'm going to use a presentation to engage in the conversation, but before doing so, let me just introduce those who will be part of the discussion. We have Dr. Elizabeth Wood, who's our Deputy Superintendent. We have Andrew Hills, who's the principal at Orangeton Elementary School. We have Robin Gories, who's the principal at Gowanna Middle School. And we have Greg Pace, who is the principal at Tasago. Joining us later will be Ron Agostinoni, who's the principal at the high school. So at this point, let me share the presentation and we will commence with the session. So it's important for us to know, excuse me 1 second here. As this presentation comes aboard, it's important for people to know that this is truly a work in progress. I say that in the sense that as you will see, there are so many components that we have to analyze, assess, consider as a part of a very comprehensive reopening plan. And so we'll be sharing a framework, and the framework will be very informative. However, we know that there are certain details that you will not hear about today, and those details will be unfolding in the next weeks to come as we plan for the fall. One thing is important to know as we reimagine Shen in terms of how we provide education, that our focus is on maximizing opportunities for in-person learning. Not only is it the focus here at Shen, it's also the focus for New York State in terms of giving, hopefully the governor will agree, giving students the opportunities to be back in school in a safe way and in an environment that's robust in terms of learning opportunities. So we'll walk through that framework as well. Just so you have some sense of where we're going from here, I'll be providing an overview of the framework as well as addressing a recent survey. Dr. Wood will then engage in a facilitated discussion with our panelists, focus on our instructional programming, recognizing that as a school district, we have a firm commitment to equity and opportunities and outcomes, and providing an authentic learning experience for our students. Representing the elementary school group, Andy Hills and Greg Pace, who have been leading the ad hoc committee work at the elementary level. At the middle school, we have Robin Gories, who's the principal of Gowanna, who's been leading the middle school ad hoc work. And at the high school, Ron Agostinoni, who will be joining us shortly, has been leading the charge at the high school. At the end of this, we will review the questions that's been submitted. If there are questions that haven't been already addressed in this presentation, we'll address them, as well as we do recognize that there are some questions because of the specific nature of those questions, that those questions are best answered as follow-up, which we'll be having follow-up sessions with academic administrators, with building principals. We'll have more target-focused conversations in the coming days and weeks ahead. And then we'll discuss some next steps in terms of the plan here at Shen. It's important to know that while how we provide education will change, what we're trying to achieve and why, our what and our why hasn't changed. As a school district, we remain steadfast, focused on providing an authentic learning experience for our students. We focus on assessing our needs through an equity lens. And what do I mean by that? We ask some critical questions as we develop our goals, as we develop our budgets, as we develop our instructional planning. And one of those critical questions is, what else can we do to make our school and classroom experience more relevant? And certainly as we think about reopening, that's a key question to ask and answer. A second question is, how can we be more responsive to the cultural shifts and capitalize on emerging changes? Again, an ideal question for the times that we're in and for the process that we're going through right now. And the third question is, how axiomatic are we? What else do we need to do to ensure equity in outcomes? Recognizing all students succeeding and realizing their full potential. So those things have driven what we have done over the years and are driving our efforts now and will drive our efforts into the future. So with that being said, this framework really focuses on the tent post, so to speak. And you see this graphic of a tent, setting up a tent, and in our cases, multiple tents as a system. And we recognize that in order for us to effectively do so, we needed parameters. We needed parameters to ensure we can maximize our capacity as a school system. And what I mean by parameters, there are actually three agencies, but four major influences on our plans. One of those agencies is the governor's office himself and the governor himself. As you know, the governor has taken a very prominent role in determining education in New York State over the last several months. Recently, he issued a press release or press statement or press conference that outlined the formula for school opening, basically daily infection rate being 5% or less. And that's the reason why each day, personally, I look at the newspaper to try to see where infection rates are going. Are we on an increase? Are we on a down? Because those things will, in fact, determine will we start school or not in September. The second part of that formula is about school closure. And the tact by the governor's office is looking at it from a regional perspective. So when I mean regional, the capital region, for example, and looking at that regional perspective and seeing what's the rate in a region infection rate, is it greater than 9% over 7-day average? And the governor also said that a final decision for school opening will be made somewhere between August 1st and August 7th. In terms of guidance, in terms of how we open school, from the governor's perspective, that was left up to school districts. However, not necessarily so, because the state education department has a responsibility to provide the guardrails as well as look at the respective regulations that impact how schools function, and subsequently how schools open. The state education department has completed a slew of review of regulations, and this slide just show a smidget, if you will, an indication of some key changes that we know that will help us with greater flexibility as we plan for reopening. Things such as unit of study, the amount of instructional time per week for a course, or flexibility with science labs, allowing hands-on as well as simulated lab situations, academic intervention services, recognizing that there were no state assessments last year and relaxing some of those requirements for the use of state data. Health screening, hearing, vision, scoliosis, some of those health screening that require close proximity between adults, some of those things were waived. Home instruction, recognizing that parents and some parents will make the choice to homeschool their children, which is a formal process that they have to go through. So that deadline to do so has been extended to August 1st, and all that information is available on the district website, or call the district office and we'll connect you with the appropriate person. Incidental teaching, which is a major one, recognizing that as schools plan for reopening, the real possibility is there. I should say not the real possibility. The reality is that we'll be asking teachers to do things outside of their certification areas. And this allows for up to 10 class hours per week to do so. So again, this just as an indication that the state education department has looked at regulations, trying to provide some flexibility as we look to open schools in a way that's healthy and safe, and in a way that also preserves a high quality educational experience for our students. The state plan is very comprehensive. And as you will see here on the state website is a very comprehensive planning document, upwards of 150 pages, which we have gone through extensively to understand the requirements of the state of New York and how those things impact our efforts here at Shenendehowa. The state has a portal that was open on the 17th of July. Ironically, the state plan, quite frankly, wasn't finalized until around the 17th, with a Q&A document coming out the following week. And that's not to be a criticism. It's the reality of the complex nature of planning for reopening and all the various factors that must be considered. We have a requirement to submit our plans by July 31st. Short window that requires a lot of work, a lot of effort, a lot of focused time. And so we're in the process now, and this is a part of the process. The commitment of hours to do live streaming is a part of the process to inform our stakeholders, to get questions and feedback from stakeholders, to help guide the development and the finalization of our plan, not only for the submission for the state, but for the details that we would need to actually open school in the fall. A second agency that's instrumental to our reopening process is the New York State Department of Health. And the New York State Department of Health also issued a very comprehensive document. So when you think about it, we have two very comprehensive guiding documents. And in many ways, we're trying to see where the alignments are, where the misalignments are, where the contradictions are, where the overlaps are, and using those two documents to essentially develop our plan and the framework that you will see here, that we'll walk through here in a second. The State Department Health Plan focuses on people, places, and processes. And it also outlines some mandatory things, which we'll highlight, as well as some recommendations. We are keenly focused clearly on the mandates and looking at those recommendations to see what's feasible here at Shenandoah. We're also engaged in a regional conversation around reopening via the capital region BOCES, but it extends beyond the capital region. We're going into Western New York, Adirondacks, the Hudson, the lower Hudson area of the state, having a lot of conversations with a lot of people, recognizing that schools across the state are faced with the same challenges. Consequently, we're trying to figure out how do we maximize resources, not only resources in terms of physical resources, but resources in terms of expertise and ideas that people have. As a result of that, we also wanted to hear from our stakeholders here in the Shen district. So a survey was issued. We had almost 1,800 people respond to the survey. A large portion of those were, as anticipated, parents, 81%. It was interesting that the feedback in terms of confidence in many ways mirrors some of the conversations that we're hearing across the country, even though this region, the rate of infection is relatively low in absolute sense, and even in a relative sense when we compare it, particularly to some of the southern states that are seeing significant spikes. Needless to say, we had about 17% of those who responded who were very confident, 20% confident, 28% still unsure, 27% not confident, and we have about 6% saying at this point they will not be sending their children back to school. So that information is important to us as we look to plan forward, but we also recognize that people's choices, people's preference, people's information will change dramatically over the course of the next month, going to August, and even going into September and October. So we're planning, recognizing that things will change, can change, and will change, and we have to be flexible in our planning process as we move forward. A major part of the planning process beyond the instructional provision is transportation. We could have the best plan for students returning to school, but we need to get kids to school. And from this survey, we see almost half the parents saying that they're willing to put their child on the bus, recognizing their stipulations such as children will wear a mask on the bus. We have about 38% saying right now, I'll drive my child to school. And we have about 17% breaks, maybe not applicable because maybe they don't have a child in school. So therefore, answering the question on the survey was irrelevant to them. When asked about access to technology, which is a major part of it, because not only are we have to be prepared in case we have a school closure, or if even when we're not allowed to have kids come back to school and have to educate every child in a virtual space, we know that access to technology is a major part of it. We also know that technology has changed the delivery of instruction in school as well as out of school. And so access to technology is a major thing. And you see here, a large majority of our parents, our students have access. However, it's something that we are planning for as we move forward. There was a slew of comments and questions from the survey. And even for the last day and a half, as we have completed these live streams, we get a lot of questions. We noticed that a lot of questions are very similar. And so what we've been trying to do is to review all those questions, literally combing through pages and pages of questions, seeing commonalities, And in the coming week or so, we'll be having a pretty extensive, but not too extensive, because we know if a document is too large for people to go through, they may not necessarily go through it completely. So we're trying to categorize different comments, different questions into a Q&A document which will be released in the coming days or probably a week or so. But the point of me showing you this is that we do, in fact, take the questions and comments that people put, and we review them, we look at them, we think about how those things are already integrated into our planning process and what's missing from our planning process that we need to address. So we're pretty confident in most of the comments and questions that are coming in that are right now already addressed, and you will hear being addressed by our panelists as we move forward. But however, the point again is to emphasize that we hear what people are saying, we hear what people are asking, and we want to make sure that our plan is cognizant of those things, and our plan is inclusive, and our plan is recognizing that there are many factors at play in terms of our final decision making. So with that being said, I want to transition back again to the guide rails that dictate our plan. The New York State Department of Health issued various protocols. This summer, since we have many employees, myself included, that work throughout the course of the summer, we need to have certain protocols in place for people to work in the summer. So we tapped into the protocol that was issued by the New York State Department of Health that talks about interim guidance for office-based work, which, quite frankly, was very applicable to what we were doing in the summertime as well. And that document was then used to develop what we call the Shen reopening plan, because not only do we have summer employees on site, we also have an extended summer year school program for a special education student that's also on site. So we needed to have these protocols in place, and this protocol will become the building block for our protocol when we have a school reopening for the fall. A major part of that is daily health screening, which will be a requirement for all employees and students coming back as well. So we're working through those kind of things, right? I'm sorry. The daily health screening will be for all employees coming back. And so this is actually the form. Each morning, employees who are working now by 5 a.m. get an email, and the email, you click on it, you click through it, you look at the symptoms, you're answering yes and no, and then at the end of it, you get a green thumbs up that you could come back, or a red thumbs up because you may have indicated that you have what the CDC has defined as one of the COVID type symptoms. That's not necessarily saying that you have COVID, it's saying that you have a symptom. And so the daily health screening is an essential part of our planning process. Another mandatory part of the planning process is face covering, and this is required for students and staff. So we will be requiring students and staff, in fact, anyone who come into a school building, any school building, be it here at the district office or any school building on campus or off campus, is required to wear a face covering. And so one of the things that we're in the process right now of doing is ordering face covering for our students. And as you see on this graphic, we're looking to order face covering with respective school names on it as well. So we have face covering for all our employees and face covering for all our students. These are washable face coverings. We also recognize that based upon certain work situations, we may actually have to have some additional disposable masks for certain employees that work in certain situations or work with certain students that require that. So we will have those extra things on hand as well. Spatial relations is a major part of the mandate in terms of maximizing social distancing. And so we're looking at a cohort model in terms of when kids come back to school and transition, trying to minimize transitions. And the spatial relationships become essential as we think about capacity, particular classroom capacity. And so we have gone into different classrooms. This is an example of an elementary classroom to look at the spatial relations, 6 feet apart from head to head. And we know that in most of our traditional size classrooms, we can easily and readily have 18 desks in those classroom spaces. We also recognize that there are some spaces that we can have more than 18 desks. And in those situations, we will be looking to maximize those capacity as well. So 18 is not an absolute for every space. 18 is what we know will work in our standard classrooms. This is a picture of a middle school classroom. Again, you see a very similar configuration, and a picture of the high school classroom, which again, you'll see a very similar configuration. I have personally gone into these spaces to see it, to feel it. We had an administrative meeting last week where we met in classrooms so administrators could be in those spaces so we could understand, appreciate the spatial distancing, understand, appreciate the wearing of mask requirements. And so we're trying to ensure that we're living what we're asking others to live as well. In terms of capacity, we are looking at the potential of repurposing other spaces for instruction, such as gyms, libraries, computer labs. And so a tremendous effort is afoot to look at capacity in all sense of it and trying to ensure we can try to maximize as much in-person instruction in a safe manner as possible. We recognize that there are situations where physical barriers may be needed where 6 feet is not feasible. And that's often in some of our offices and our workrooms. And this is an example of one of the workrooms at the high school where you see file cabinet barrier. However, between head to head, what I mean by head to head from chair to chair, that's a 6 feet distance between those things. And so we have gone through those workrooms. Again, I've personally gone in those workrooms to see the spatial relations, to have an appreciation of those spatial relationships as well. And a big part of this piece of it is to reduce congestions and transitions, be it transitions in spaces, transitions in hallways. And you'll hear more about this, as particularly as we start talking in a few minutes here about instructional programming model. Even one-way directional, trying to minimize as much as we can bilateral movements within hallways. We recognize that sometimes that's impossible because, quite frank with you, the only way to get from point A to point B is a single hallway. And so as much as we can, we're going to try to stagger transitions between hallway to avoid a lot of people being in hallways. Even though whenever you're in those situations, everyone is wearing a mask, we're still trying to minimize those transitions as much as we can. Another major piece to this equation is the health service provisions. And right now, Rebecca Carmen is working closely with our nurses, with our school physicians, with outside providers, with Department of Health, locally as well as at the state level, and looking at our training documents for recognizing signs and symptoms. Those plans will be available to each employee. We're creating videos that talks about how to wash your hands, how to wear PPEs. They'll be available to students and employees. We're looking at the regulations that deals with vulnerable populations. Recognize that there are adults as well as students that have an increased risk for severe COVID illness. And so we're looking at those type things, be it addition of PPE, looking at the respective modification, looking at isolation. So the point is, all those things are driven by guidance from the health department, and we're taking those guidance and translating them into plans that we could apply here at Shenandoah. A major part of that is contact tracing, and contact tracing becomes important because we know if there is a suspected case, we need to be able to identify quickly, isolate, and disinfect. And so contact tracing then lends to the reason why we're asking people to sign in when they come into buildings, because we want to know who was here, when they were here, where they were in the building. So if we ever have a situation of a suspected case or confirmed case, we can quickly go back and trace and see who the potential impacted parties are and the potential exposed area to disinfect immediately. And so that becomes a major part of our protocol as returning to school. A second piece related to that is having the capacity to isolate, again, individuals who may be showing symptoms while they're at work. That applies to both adults and students. And so we're in the process now and looking at nurses' offices and maybe second space beyond a nurse office that we can have for that containment area. We're looking at protocols. The state has issued protocols in terms of after a COVID case, what we have to do. So we have translated that into our Shen plan. We're looking at school closures. What are the triggers for school closures? And all those things. Right now, the current regulation has provided some flexibility that essentially that if we can isolate a potentially affected area, we can 24-hour grace period, totally, completely disinfect the area and have that area operational. However, we do recognize that the potential exists that we may have to pivot operations completely. Same thing happened on March 13th and pivot to a virtual environment. So we're planning for the capacity to do so, to pivot all schools, a school, all grade level. Who knows what the situation might be to a complete virtual environment at any one point. We do know that mental health supports are essential right now because People, a person, their family lives, and otherwise are dealing with the COVID situation differently. So we have a continued focus on providing high quality mental health supports to not only our students, but to our staff as well. Speaking of that, disinfecting and cleaning is a major priority. And again, everything that we're doing as a system, there are guidelines and guardrails that help us define what we're doing. And this is an example in terms of cleaning and disinfecting. We have guidelines coming from not only from the state level, but from the federal level that talks about proper cleaning and disinfecting of workplaces, schools, and homes. And so we're following those guidelines very closely as we move forward. We're looking at daily disinfection of spaces, even doing transitions of major spaces, disinfecting. We have expended a significant amount of money on equipment to quickly sanitize spaces, to sanitize buses between runs. We're looking at significant expenditure of resources for resources for personal cleaning of spaces. What I mean by that, cleaning your own computer, cleaning your own desk. And so we want and expect people to clean those spaces, frequently touch spaces, looking to have those kind of things. Even things such as touch-free paper towel dispensers in bathrooms, going and converting those things. Significant investment, again, to ensure that the areas are clean, areas are disinfected, that proper hygiene is followed, even maintenance grounds protocols. Filtration and ventilation is a major part of it. As most of you probably know, in order for malls to reopen, they needed to have a MERV 8 rating on their filters. We have always had that largely across the district. We recognize that there are some rooms, some nook and cranny type spaces that serve as singleton offices that may not necessarily satisfy that ventilation piece. We're looking at those spaces now and how we can best use those spaces and or change the ventilation in those spaces. But largely the filtration across the school district is meeting and or exceeding the state recommendation as it is right now. And on top of that, if you think about your personal home, most people change the filter in their HVAC, in their air conditioning and heating system once a year. As a school system, we were already doing that twice a year. We'll be upping that to 4 times a year. And so not only the frequency lend to better air and cleaning of air, but quite frankly, it's also a cost that we have to take into consideration, but it's a cost that worthwhile investing in terms of air quality and ventilation. So we're looking at those things as we move forward. We're thinking about people coming into the buildings, contractors, and ensuring that those protocols, the health requirement protocols, those things are being followed by people who we have contracted service relationships with, or contractors that are doing construction in buildings. All those individuals have to follow the same protocols, and we have confirmation on a daily basis that those things are taking place as well. Even deliveries to buildings, trying to minimize people coming into building, into spaces, designated delivery spaces, designated in and out, exits and entrance into buildings. All those are things that will change the flow, the ebbs and flow of a building, but all those things are focused on providing a safe environment for our students, for our staff, and for anyone who may enter our building. Transportation, as noted before, is a major part of the planning process. The transportation department has been looking at multiple scenarios in terms of how we provide transportation to students. Students will be required to wear a mask on the bus. We do know that there's some students, because of medical issues or otherwise, who cannot, and those things are addressed. In fact, we're addressing them right now through our ESY program. So we do know that those exceptions will occur, and we'll have plans in place to address those exceptions. Right now, we're looking at capacity. The starting point is around 50% capacity on a bus. To give you perspective, a large bus has a capacity for up to 66 pupils. We're looking at maybe 36, possibly slightly higher, because siblings can sit together on a bus. But again, having those things between masks, between spatial relationships on bus, having staggered drop-offs, to avoid a lot of kids coming offloading at the bus port at the same time, some staggered drop-offs, looking at outside district runs and our capacity to do those kind of things, disinfecting runs, buses between runs. All those things are things that are part of the planning process, details that are documented to ensure that we're doing those things consistently, we're doing those things very well every day. And the last part to that is encouraging parents to drop the kids off. We recognize, though, that it also creates another problem to us in terms of the traffic on campus and the potential logjam with that. So we're in the process of trying to differentiate between when buses drop off, when parents drop off, because we don't want to solve one problem and create another problem. Food services. Again, the things that some of us often don't think about. We think about food services, our capacity to serve breakfast, serve lunch to our students. Social distancing cafeteria. We're in the process now of literally counting off heads and spaces. How many kids can we have at a particular table? And how many kids can we have in the cafeteria? We're looking at prepackaged meals and having meals being delivered to classrooms. All those things are things that are part of the extensive food service plan that's being put together as we speak. So with all that being said, it's important for people to realize that the plan that we're putting together isn't my plan as superintendent. This is our plan as a school system that's predicated, that's guided by the respective mandates from the Department of Health, the respective mandates for the New York State Education Department, and the executive orders from the governor. And so we're looking at all those documents and trying to go from here down to a concrete plan that we can execute on behalf of the Shenandoah community. So those are all the operational things to ensure that we can provide a quality educational experience for our students. And so I'm going to transition and invite Dr. Wood to come in and talk about our educational focus, recognizing again that we're truly committed to equity and opportunities and outcomes for our students. We were before, we are now, and we will continue moving forward. So Dr. Wood, if you don't mind.
Sure, thank you. So we have been working very hard to develop our plans for return to school, and knowing we need to be prepared for in-person for all of our students and the potential that we would need to revert to remote instruction, depending on guidelines from the governor, and possibly a hybrid model. So based on our experience from March through June, it became apparent that it was very challenging for teachers, for students, and for parents of our youngest students. And we are looking at prioritizing having K-6. I know we typically talk about K-5, but grades K through 6 back on site every day. Also want to have a priority on making sure we're engaging students that were a little harder to reach or engage in that March to June timeframe. While not specific to a conversation with elementary folks, it's important to know that our special education self-contained programs, FSD, ISD, and MOVE, we're looking to have those students in daily as well at the 7-12 level, recognizing that for some students, virtual instruction is very hard to simulate what you can do in the classroom. ENL will continue to be a service that is provided as scheduled, and we're really trying to take care to make sure our students continue learning English. We are looking at the possibility of how we might go about providing online learning for students in vulnerable populations. Right now, there are regional conversations, as Dr. Robinson mentioned, going on about how to provide some level of access, recognizing it might not be fully interactive and it might not be just specific to Shen, but more of a regional approach. We have heard that some families are looking to homeschool their children, and so folks who are interested in that need to go to the district website where the homeschool process is outlined and the steps that parents need to take are posted there. It is a formal process. Okay, the ubiquitous access to technology, we were in good shape for grades 6 through 12, having moved to the one-to-one over the last couple of years. And then we had been working on expanding our technology capacity at K-5. Thankfully, that came in very handy because we were able to use many of those devices as loaners. I think we loaned up to close to 600 additional devices just at the elementary level from March to June. We anticipate needing to continue to provide that level of support if at some point we need to be virtual with our youngest learners again. We continue having conversations about how to prioritize our curriculum. We'd like to think that there will be a greater emphasis on time spent teaching and learning for our return to school, but we still encourage teachers to think about what are the skills that students really need to know for the next level and make sure that those become the prioritized topic areas, content areas for the time that they are in school. Okay, Dr. Robinson, we can go on to the next one. So when we shifted to out of school in March, we were looking for what we considered to be like equitable grading practices that reflected the situation we were in. And we just determined that EOL, NYL, the evidence of learning or not yet learned, was the best approach for March through June. And it probably was, even though it was challenging for folks. But we know we're going to need something a little bit more, I would say, specific going into September, and therefore we are looking at this standardized rubric, this type of standardized rubric. You can see work is being done on it right now in the background, where we've got different levels of learning, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, all the way down to a not yet learned, and that would have a translation in the student information system. And what's most important about this is that the language on the rubric, the description, talks about the type of learning or learning behaviors the student is demonstrating through that individual assignment or assessment. But it would revert, where we give numeric grades on the report card, it would revert back to a numeric grade. And where we give a rubric, it would be aligned to the rubric. So we are working on more details related to grading for our return to school. We are also looking at best practices for online learning. We know our teachers did a great job of making a transition that we never anticipated needing to make. We've gotten feedback from teachers, from families, from some of our students about what worked best. We know the importance of providing synchronous instruction in the event we need to return back to a virtual environment at any point, and that will be a priority going forward. It will be required that students receive some synchronous instruction if we are out of school again. And we've also been looking at what some of the best practices are for online learning, and we're in the process of building some resources for teachers to review, to start thinking about, if I need to design a lesson like that again, how can I do that most effectively? We're also prioritizing the integration of social emotional learning and continuing our focus on culturally responsive teaching and practices surrounding equity. Teachers are going to be encouraged to make space for this right within their teaching practices, knowing that this isn't something that can be done just as I would say, an add-on or delivered by somebody else, but it has to be routinely integrated throughout our work in the classroom. Also providing some additional guidance, because when we're doing synchronous instruction, meaning real-time instruction to our students, there will be times where it will be appropriate for us to record and post our Google Meet videos for students who were unable to, or families unable to engage live in real time. We're also working on some standard design for the Google Classroom setup. So this is most important for teachers of grades 4 through 12, where we are using Google Classroom extensively and exclusively. And this would give guidelines so that the student has a common experience when using Google Classroom. So we're also going to be giving professional development at the secondary level to Teaching in a Block, and you'll hear more about that shortly. And I already mentioned the social emotional well-being. And most important to our K-3 teachers on listening to the live stream today, training on the Seesaw platform. And we say thank you to those of you who searched high and low and found what you needed, but we realized we needed to do better in the event we need to shift to virtual again. And Seesaw will be a great communication tool even when we return to school. So now for some more specifics about our elementary plan, I'll invite Greg Pace, principal of Tasago, and Andy Hills, principal of Oranjan Elementary, to share some of the work that they have been focused on thus far.
So when Andy and I first started, it was almost like we didn't know where to start first. And before we were given specific guidance on elementary, Andy and I came to the conclusion, we just looked at each other at one point and said, we've got to get every student in here. And we have to serve those families who are trying to get back to work, who may not have the luxury of being able to work remotely from home. So we decided to come up with a little mantra, and we put it at the top of our document, and we said, we serve the public good. We are bigger than just our small little elementary schools. So the next step was saying, can we actually make this happen? And safety was at the top of the list. We had CDC guidance from SCD, and we found that we were able to fit our students into our school. And we started to look at instead of calling them rooms, we looked at spaces because rooms really limited our thinking, and we're going to be eventually meeting with teachers to talk about that. We are working through now staffing and how all of that impacts all those other pieces. So safety was basically the core of everything we did, because we had to hit that mandate to make sure that the spaces we had were going to be conducive to a safe environment for our children.
As Greg was talking there, I was thinking through too that because our spaces are going to be creative, and as you heard from Dr. Robinson earlier, fewer students in our classrooms, that leads us down the line of what is our instructional delivery going to look like. And that's going to be the big conversation here. And that Greg just mentioned on Friday, we're meeting with some stakeholders from teachers to really start to go through that. And we certainly have ideas, but now's the time for us to really hash out those ideas and make sure that they're viable for what can happen in a building. And you see on the slide that's in front of you here, one of the bullets says synchronous and asynchronous, maximizing contact time. And with 18 students only maximum in a classroom, that means that we're going to have to look to what our sections are like. And synchronous, as you've heard, that's when a teacher is live in front of students with a lesson. And asynchronous would be some form of that lesson happening virtually someplace else, possibly in the building. And as we said, that's maximizing the contact time for teachers and students together. But it's also us being as creative as possible and as flexible as possible in utilizing the staff that we have here at Shen. So Friday will be an exciting day. I think lots of information will come out of that. And as everything is happening on a day-to-day basis, we'll have more information. But just to reiterate too, it's so important to all of us, not just Greg and I, but all the principals you're here with, and Dr. Robinson, Dr. Wood, that health and safety is really the priority of what we're trying to do as we gather our students back.
Great, thank you. And I know Andy and Greg, we've had some conversations. The kind of go-to sometimes is to say we'll focus in on ELA and math as our priority, but we continue to think about what's important for students. So anybody want to share some details on, what we've determined in terms of areas of focus for instruction?
Right. So that, Dr. Wood hit the easy ones. That came to mind right away. And then we expanded. We see the importance of the sciences right now with the pandemic, and we feel that it's our obligation to keep that at the forefront because of the need of those scientists out there to solve a pandemic. We have a need for a social conscience, to be aware of our history and to understand what's happening in the social dynamic in the country right now. I think the elementary level can address those concerns right now. I think it's important that we do. It's part of our goals document. So I think the social studies are going to continue. And then when we look at the rest, we start filling up our day. And when we look at our safety restrictions, this is where we have to start looking at the capacity of the people who are working in the building and what will be the next things we can do to keep that social distancing, which is the big one, continuing on and creating a safe environment, which is something that I know teachers and parents are concerned about. So I've said it before, we can do anything, we can't do everything. We're going to try and do everything, but it's going to look different if we do.
Great, thank you. So that leads us to a conversation about grade 6, which in some ways we looked at what we were doing in grade 5 and continue to, and think about how can we have our grade 6 students have their core areas as well and be in school every day. And for that, I'll turn it over to Robin Gorries, principal of Gowanna Gowanna Middle School.
So as has already been stated, we are looking to have our 6th grade students back full-time, just like the K-5 students. And we want to start the year off with an orientation for our 6th grade. And as important as an orientation is for all of our students coming back, because they will have had the 6 months of not being in person, we really do recognize the importance of our 6th graders coming to a new school, needing to see the school, needing to learn about teaming, needing to learn about the new courses. and so on. So we're really looking forward to that aspect. We are not looking to offer every course every day. We are looking at larger blocks of instruction time, and we are going to definitely try to maintain our teaming and minimize those cohort groups. And some things that we're looking to do, just like the other schools, will be extend our passing time and stagger the release of students into the hallways. But we are reviewing, we have some models that we're reviewing, and we will have some faculty members in tomorrow to review some of those models and look at our next steps as we move along. We too are looking at utilizing spaces in different ways. So we're being very creative, just as the elementary schools are, to look at our spaces, especially since if we're bringing the sixth graders back in full time, we're going to be needing not necessarily double the space, but we're going to be needing more space, which is obviously going to impact other spaces in our school. So then in regards to the 7th and 8th grade, again, still minimizing the groups of students, the cohort groups. We are still going to extend the passing time and stagger the release. So there will be some similarities with the 6th, 7th, and the 8th grade. But we do want to consider the number of classes that each student are responsible for each day in school and when they're out of school. And the goal is to ensure that there will be that synchronous, that in-school learning and in person, and that asynchronous instruction. We may be looking more so in the 6th grade than in the 7th and 8th, but we may be looking at also delivering some of our instruction right remotely from within our school. We will have academic expectations for students when they're not in school, and I'll talk about that in a second in regards to how we're looking to rotate kids in and out. Attendance will be taken every day. And again, we will be looking at spaces very creatively. And one of the key things is we do want to develop a schedule that if in the event we do have to go full online again, that we can quickly pivot into that schedule and make as seamless as a change as possible. We are hoping to schedule all courses, but again, that is going to be problematic due to the spatial relations. So we were going to have to look with a fine-tooth comb at different courses to see if that's going to work out. But as you can see from the screen right now, we are looking to bring the 7th and 8th grade in 2 groups. So we would split the students in half. And what our intent to do is that if we have a 7th grade student and an 8th grade student, or a 7th grade student and a high school student, is try our best to make sure that they are coming in on the same 2 days in a row. So there'll be 2 days in a row, then 2 days at home, and then 2 days back in school. And we'll kind of continue to repeat that process. But as you can see from the third bullet there, when the students are home, there still will be work that needs to be done, and there still will be attendance taken. So again, we will be splitting the kids into roughly, roughly 50% of our population on both days. Moving forward to the next slide, then you can see that we're looking at 4 blocks of time. We don't have any definitive times, but this is something we're going to be sharing with our teachers tomorrow. And take a peek at those times and look, how does advisory work, and where can we fit lunch into the picture. And with having 4 blocks, large blocks like that, we really feel you can delve deeper into the subject matter, and there will be significantly less transitions. If you want to move to the next one, you can see our typical schedule that we have is on the left. And that's an actual schedule that a student had this past year. And you can see passing time, there's a significant amount of passing time. And that's time that we can't have in this COVID time. We can't have that amount of passing time. And as you can see over to the right, that is an example. If we went with something as similar, I was mentioning about 4 larger blocks of time, significantly less time, and force kids to have exposure in different classrooms, and teachers to have exposure. So we're thinking that moving into this type of what you see on the right-hand side is going to be best to limit exposure for both students and for our staff. And obviously, health and safety is paramount at this time. So our next steps are, again, to be working with our staff. We're going to be starting that work tomorrow. We're going to need to determine staffing. We're going to need to determine which students come in on different days. A lot of work to still do, but we're really looking forward to moving forward with this process.
Great, thank you, Robin. And I just want to emphasize one of the points you were making is having students come in and learn about their new school. And that would be something we would be looking at with the transition back to school, really K-12, knowing that the school that students left in March, there are going to be some different guidelines when they come back in, and helping all students start to feel comfortable, and also providing some time for teachers to have professional learning also. So thank you, Robin. And Mr. Agostinoni, high school principal, is here to detail the high school plan. So, Ron.
So just to add, and Andy, Greg, and Robin already did a wonderful job kind of outlining the same thought process at the high school. I'll add a few things that we've all discussed, and you can see it's going to be very similar to what you saw with 7, 8. And what we've learned is we have to be flexible throughout this process, because things are changing daily. And what we think was a good idea today might not be a good idea tomorrow. And I think Dr. Robinson kind of outlined that process as we're going through. But one thing that is important, that is not going to change, whether it be today, tomorrow, or September, October, is the student experience. So we're trying to balance that student experience with all the plans we're putting in place, because we know students are returning to something that looks different than they left. Whether it be at the elementary level, which I'm sure many of you are from the elementary level watching this, or at the high school level, middle school. On March 13th, school looked different. So we want to keep that in mind when our students return. That's going to look a little different, and that's why Dr. Wood outlining some of that, the ability to kind of see their new school, see the new procedure, and kind of get kids in a slow start type of approach might be helpful as we look to transition into this new school time period. So same things. We have some space constraints. We have some staffing issues. What's helpful at the high school is if we're going with a 50% model, we're not bringing in a grade level every day. So as Robin's trying to outline that in the middle school, some of our space constraints are a little relieved as compared to the middle school complex, because we're not having a grade in every day. So we're able to kind of do some things, but we still have those space constraints. We're still working with the social distancing. We have and some of the extracurricular stuff with 12 feet, we have very large orchestras and choral performing groups here at the high school. And at 12 feet of distancing, it gets to be a bit of a concern, or a challenge, I would say. We've had our music teachers in here with their tape measures. They could probably tell you the exact measurements of every large space in the school, because they've been in doing that. So just shows you the dedication they have. I think, Dr. Wood, we could probably jump ahead or Dr. Robinson, maybe to the next one. This is like Robin pointed out, if you imagine the blue there, that's group 1, and the green is group 2. So if we started on a Monday, that blue group's going to report Monday, Tuesday. Wednesday, Thursday, they would be doing the remote learning that Dr. Wood pointed out. It might look different per class, but there'll be attendance, there'll be work to do. They'll be coming into classes, whether it be live stream or doing work. That's still being ironed out, but they will be responsible for work. So Monday, Tuesday, they're in. Thursday, Friday, they're home. And then it goes Monday, Friday, they're back in, or Friday, Monday, they're back in, and then home. And that cycle would continue as we look at the 50% capacity. And if we just jump on to our next one, that's the schedule that Robin kind of outlined. Lunch I put in block 3, Robin had in block 2. It would be within block 2 or 3, depending on how the times line up. So we'll get to those details. Extended passing time, and Dr. Robinson, if we just jump to the next one there. In addition, I'll add, you can see all the passing times, which from a public health standpoint, in the COVID era, that does create concern. Those classrooms are being used by a lot more students. Teachers are coming into contact with twice the amount of students they would, as opposed to the schedule on the right. Also, from an educational standpoint, so not just the public health, but the actual education, those classes on the left, after we account for extra passing time, would be about 30 minutes, and that's it. So that's a short period of time for each class to then be taking 10 minutes to change, then get 30 minutes to be up and down. So there's educational components that we benefit from, and of course the public health for the schedule on the right, especially as many of you probably know, we get into the social emotional learning, which will be a focus as we jump into school here in September. And the last point, just can't highlight enough, and it's already been highlighted by Robin, that we can pivot to the virtual learning. Some of you might have high school students. If you look at the schedule on the left, I know that's a lot of changing of screen time every day. If you're going to 9 different Google Meets or 8 different Google Meets, as opposed to 4 in a longer period of time, gets you the opportunity to have a quick Google Meet, check in, do some work, maybe collaborate with some of your classmates. That's a lot of the reasons we're looking to to move to that schedule, because it will be universal for in or out of school. So I think that's it from the high, not that's it, but for now, that's it from the high school end.
Great. Thank you to the teams that have been working on this. I know we have a lot more to do in terms of ironing out, but I am very confident that working to develop a plan that focuses on student safety, prioritizes instruction, and works within the guidelines that we have been provided by the outside entities or the governing bodies, such as the Department of Health, State Education Department, and the Governor's Office. So back to you, Dr. Robinson.
Thank you very much, Dr. Wood, as well as Ron, Robin, Andy, and Greg. And those listening realize that there are many, many things that we have already considered, plans that people are working on right now. I have countless attachments from administrators as we speak that will be attached to this document, which would then be transformed into a state document. But before I go into that, let me just address a few other outstanding things that all these things that we're talking about that are new or different or additional or enhancement, we always have to think about the fiscal capacity. We still have the looming potential for state aid cuts. I pray every day that we don't have a situation that as we're trying to do all these things, that we're faced with that as another serious challenge. However, if you watched our budget presentations, you know that we have taken a lot of things into consideration and have some contingencies in place. And we pride ourselves as a school district of always trying to be proactive in our efforts and not reactive. And so we hopefully we have some of those plans to address some of the fiscal capacity issues that are potentially looming. However, we know there are contingencies surrounding staff, and people asking questions. Can we get a cadre of trusted substitutes, and how are we going to deal with substitutes? We're in the process of going through that process right now with the HR. People asking about additional technology in classrooms. We're looking at that right now in terms of even additional video camera access so we can have simulcasting of certain classes during a course to kids who may not necessarily cannot, because of various circumstances, be on site. So we're looking at those additional capacity issues. Professional development is going to be a huge part of the success of this plan, because our goal is to provide the resources so people can be successful. And we trust and hope that the professionals that we have here, Shen, will embrace the change, recognizing that we're trying to support them to success. So we're looking for people who have certain expertise to share the expertise, share the wealth of knowledge, and share the best practices. We know there are tons of best practices realized during the last several months. So we're looking forward to that. Even when it comes to block scheduling, we know we have a lot of people who have taught in that, who are virtual experts in those things. So we're looking to tap into those resources as well. Even transportation, having multiple runs or staggered runs, all those things have serious fiscal implication. Retrofitting of buildings, filtration systems, retrofitting filtration systems, the hand freezing bathrooms. We know that there are spaces, for instance, at the high school, even though this is an elementary-based call, we know at high school, we're going through a construction project right now. And so we're trying to figure out how do we mitigate that in terms of our capacity, as well as all the other things that we're talking about in terms of ventilation and things of that nature. So there are a lot of factors at play. And I share that because even though those challenges are there, folks, we're committed. We're committed as a system to do the best job possible on behalf of the employees that we have who serve the wonderful kids who parents send them with blind faith every day, that we're going to do what's in their best interest. And related to that, we also get a lot of questions related to public use of facilities and grounds. Right now, our schools are closed because the same guidelines, all the guidelines that I just outlined to you, those same guidelines will apply to anyone coming to our schools and our facilities. So until those things are submitted, until we have plans and processes to address all those things with any users of our facilities, our schools are still considered closed, not only by me as superintendent, also, quite frankly with you, by the current mandate by the governor and otherwise. So some steps moving forward, it was shared many times over, that not only are we looking to inform and engage stakeholders through events such as this, or the survey, or the many other ways that we have been doing it. We'll be having conversations with our respective bargaining units folks. We have had some already. We'll continue to have those in the days and weeks ahead. We'll be bringing representative members coming in, as you mentioned, as Robin and Ron and Greg mentioned this week. There'll be teacher groups coming in and discussing different things. We'll be looking at support staff groups coming in. Transportation has been doing the same thing. Food services doing the same thing. So everyone is making sure that we understand the logistics, that we understand the implications of the things that we're doing. And not only will we be doing this in the next couple of weeks, quite frankly, we'll be doing this throughout the month of August into September, until we get to a point where, as an organization, things are smooth and seamless. So this is a constant work in progress for all of us. In terms of plan submission, the ad hoc group and the individuals on the call right now, Ron, Greg, Robin, are leading the respective instructional ad hoc group. We have folks that are leading the operational ad hoc groups. We have 3 meetings scheduled in the coming week that we're going to be hammering out more details, recognizing that there are a lot of details. Even when we submit our plan to the state, and even when we have our plan available for the public view, we know that there'll still be details and specifications that we need to hammer out in August and even to September. A special board meeting is planned for the 28th, at which point we'll be walking through a lot of the same information you've heard here with the board and any new information that we'll have until at that point, to make sure, again, that everyone is aware, everyone is on board, everyone is moving the same direction. Our goal is to submit our plan by the 29th of July, not long from here. And in fact, it's quite frankly, it's a week from today. And so we're looking to do so. We're looking to, after that plan is submitted, a part of the state process is to make sure that plan is public facing. So it'll be on our website. It'll be a web-based document. It'll be issued SIS, all the ways that we communicate right now. So again, people understand and appreciate what we're doing as a school system. We also recognize that, quite frankly, some people will disagree with what we're doing and make other choices. And we understand that. We respect those choices that people make for their children. However, we still have an obligation to put forth the best possibility to have students on site in whatever capacity, in a safe way and in a way that the instructional programming is high quality. Ultimately, at the end of the day, we have the best plan, but we're still going to wait on the governor's decision. The governor said, and I hope he keeps to it, that he'll be making a decision between August 1st and August 7th. So on one of those days, we'll hear either the plan that Shan has put together we can execute, or the governor make a decision that, quite frankly, causes us to go into a quick tailspin and modify all the plans that we have made. So we'll see what brings between August 1st and August 7th. With that being said, when we look towards school opening in September, even before as well as during, we'll be looking to having targeted Google Meets on focused conversations, because looking at some of the questions that people have posed, everything such as, how do we teach certain things? What will happen to certain roles? Those are things that at this point on this call, we're not prepared to have, but those are the things in those smaller conversations will happen. Principals, once we have a master plan in place and consistency in terms of direction, individual principals, academic administrators will be engaging in those more targeted conversations that focus on those more specific questions that people have right now. So I'm asking folks, keep those questions. And by the way, all the questions that are being submitted, we're capturing all those questions. We're trying to categorize those questions. We're sending those questions to respective administrators that are leading the charge on development of certain segments of the overall plan, and having those questions drive their thinking, drive their conversation. So I share that to say to you that if you submit a question, you say, hey, he didn't answer my question. It's not because I didn't hear your question, it's because I'm trying to think of the most opportune, the most appropriate time for your question to be answered. And also to inform you that your question will inform our thinking, period. And that's why your question is important to us. Staff training during that first week of school, wherever that first week might be. Again, we may have the governor come in and say, yes, schools can open, but you won't open until X date in September. So whatever those declarations are, we'll make the adjustments and move forward. But we know that whatever that date is, we're going to need some transitional time, some PD time, some orientation time. And so we want to make sure we do those things up front, make that investment up front, so the experience moving forward will be a seamless quality experience for our students and our staff. And again, related to question, I was just scanning down through the question that Mrs. DeFiciana sent to me, just briefly looking at the questions here on my phone. There's some interesting questions that, quite frankly, I didn't think about before. Some more questions that focus on the SIS system in terms of having a uniform template in terms of how information that we send out at SIS. And so something on the portal. So something that I have to about pending assignments, something that, quite frankly, good question. So I'll be forwarding that question to different people. Say, look at this question, think about our portal and how does that comes into play as we talk about standardization of Google Classrooms. Some people talk about the code of conduct. Yes, we're looking at the code of conduct in terms of from a compliance of public health code. And as people know, the code of conduct not only applies to students, it applies to anyone within our building, adults and students alike, as well. In fact, one of the questions I thought was very intriguing is how, I thought it was going to be a question, how do we, when kids don't comply with it, question was, what happened when adults don't comply with it? And clearly, one of the things that it's the same expectation. Expectation is if you're supposed to be wearing masks, you're wearing a mask. And if someone wants to be belligerent about it, quite frankly with you, we have to remove from the space, because at the end of the day, we cannot have anyone because of their own personal, quote unquote, conviction, decided not going to comply with the health requirements. We have to uphold those health requirements. Similar to people asking about things like going into bathrooms. Bathrooms will have social distancing, but that's the reason why mask wearing becomes so important. So important that you wear a mask anywhere that, one, you may think you may encounter someone. Two, that quite frankly, you may think that, you know what, I'm not comfortable in this air environment, so I'm going to wear your mask, because part of the mask is not only protecting yourself, but you're protecting others as well. So we know those kind of things are important to us. Again, I'm just scanning through. The substitute one was an interesting one that I'll be relaying to HR in terms of how we look at substitute, how do we clear substitute, especially if substitute coming on a day-to-day substitute, how do they get their daily self-certification? Those are things that we're working through right now with HR. Another one that I thought was very interesting is continuation of faculty meetings virtually. And in fact, we had a conversation before where people saw a lot of benefit and success in doing those type things. Again, it falls right into place where we're going to try to avoid large groups. So it's pointless having small groups with kids and small group of teachers. And then we're going to tell all teachers, all 50, 70, 100, let's meet in the little theater, or let's meet in the cafeteria in Tasago or wherever those situations might be, versus let's use technology to be smart, just use technology to be effective. So I do foresee some on-site in those situations and some use of technology as we move through the process. One that came out that quite frankly, it seems logical, but it's something that we're not allowed to do is, someone say, can teachers have a thermometer and check the temperature of kids every day? The provision doesn't allow for us to do that because of the medical pieces. And so, yes, those are some things that we're working on, some protocols right now with nurses, that how do we recognize signs and symptoms, and how do we intervene those things very quickly as we move forward. Again, I just want to scan through some of these questions to make sure I'm not missing anything. APPR requirements. Right now, that's a huge question that's been posed to the state, recognizing that depends on how schools open, it will impact APPR, because not only how we open, but how schools across the state, because different school districts will be making different decisions, different models based upon their capacity, based upon their circumstances. And if we have such variation, how can we then have reliability in some of these evaluation pieces? So we're looking at that. Even, quite frankly, we have no idea where we're going with state assessments at this point, be it 3 through 8 or Regents exams for that matter. So those decisions will hopefully in the next couple days or weeks here, we have some good sense of that. But we have to recognize that APPR is a law, and that law dictates that those things will happen. We had some relaxation of that this past spring, and I hope, to be quite frank with you, that would be a relaxation. As I sit here, that's not a major priority for me. Not saying that the evaluation and the conversation with teachers are not a major priority. That's something that will happen. Right now, our priority is how do we focus on quality instruction? How do we focus on safe environments? And when we start doing those things, well, I fundamentally believe that with a professional commitment to do everything that we should be doing on behalf of our kids, those things will follow. We haven't had a huge issue with incompetence at all with our teachers. So I don't anticipate that we're going to have it moving forward. So subsequently, we're banking on the strong professionalism that we have seen over the years and trying to support those things. We do recognize that there are processes that deal with tenure and all those type things. We've never put someone's job situation in jeopardy or in peril because of a lack of process. So those things we're working through as we speak as well. Just quickly scanning through to make sure that we're people asking about certain courses where it becomes necessary for the student to read the lips of a teacher. And so can that person wear a shield versus the mask? The common sentiment right now is to wear a mask under the shield. So the question from a logical piece, just me thinking off the cuff, if that teacher in that circumstances has both and when providing instruction at a spatial distance and only wear the shield, yes, it prevents that piece of it, but that person also has to recognize that the shield is not a substitute for wearing a mask when you're transitioning or moving around as well. So we have ordered shields for some of those situations. We use them right now for some of our specialized summer school programs. And so those things are already into consideration as we move forward. Again, I'm just quickly scanning through some of the questions. A lot of questions related to scheduling, which we already addressed and which will be addressed. The BEDS program, as Dr. Wood mentioned, having kids coming on board. Mrs. Mallard and her team are working on different protocols specifically to those programs where you have more closer contact, interaction with students. And again, we're going through that right now with the ESY program and working through those protocols as we speak. Supervision of lunches, those are logistics that every building will be working through to make sure that we're doing that in a seamless way as we move forward. People ask about why can't we just rent a open space? Well, the state regulation, in order for us to do school anywhere, has to pass all sorts of code requirements. And quite frankly with you, by the time we do that, we'll be into the next following school year, getting those things satisfied. So subsequently, we look to maximize the spaces that we have here in the school as much as possible as we move forward. People ask, so if certain people spaces are not being used, such as the library or the gymnasium, what happened to those teachers? And so I don't want to imply anyone that if we're not using the space, we don't need a librarian. Our goal is how that person's expertise can be used differently to enhance the educational experience. And so those are conversations we're having right now. Mr. Cohen is having a conversation with phys ed teachers. Frank Rizzoli is having a conversation with our performing arts folks and our art teachers. We'll be having conversation with our librarians because I know our librarians have been doing a lot of neat things. They were doing a lot of neat things during the COVID period to support the instructional experience of kids. And so we anticipate some of those things will continue as well. So our goal is not to use this to get rid of staff. I don't want anyone to have that thought running through our head because at the end of the day, we need the capacity that we have and we need to be able to maximize the capacity that we have. Just a few more questions here. Just want to make sure. Co-teaching, consultant teaching services, all those things, special education services, those things, the IEP provisions, we are going to uphold the integrity of IEPs, recognizing that some of the delivery will be different. And so those are the conversations that Michelle Mylod or Tamara, or Armin at the elementary level, or Lisa Young at the middle school level, or Kat at the high school. All those are the conversation that those folks are working on right now. We'll be engaging with special education teachers to talk about how those things work and how can we change our approaches or whatever changes is necessary to effectively meet the needs or uphold the integrity of respective IEPs. And again, the temp piece is something that quite frankly, it is a big question because right now, there would be a great reliance on parents and families doing it because the regulations talking about temperature before they get to school. But there's also a huge impracticality of us lining up every kid at the door. So when you think about any elementary school, we're talking about several hundred kids, or at the high school, even at a 50% capacity, still talking about several hundred kids and taking temperature after temperature after temperature. That's the impracticality of that is a difficult one. So we're working through some of those logistics and talking about the reliance on parents as staff members. You have to do the daily screening at home and making sure that you don't have a temperature that exceeds 100 is a part of that screening process as well. So then the nursing services, and those are big plans that's taking place, how nurses interchange with staff to, again, keeping everyone at a point where we're exercising due diligence in terms of signs and symptoms. Again, folks, I would love to tell you that we have all the answers to every question. I don't think we have all the questions, much less all the answers to every question. The point I'm making with this is an evolving process. And as this particular slide shows that Shen is in, and we have to be in it all together. And I sincerely say that in order for us to be successful, we all have to come with that mindset that, you know what, we're going to work it out. We're going to work through the challenges. We're going to work through the questions. And if I ask a question, I'm going to try to pose an answer, and we're going to come with creative solutions. We're going to come with open minds, and this is going to be an evolving process. Because if there was already a template that says, do it this way, we would have that template in doing it. So with that being said, one of the things I want to point out as we look to conclude this is that we have looked at a lot of documents. In fact, all the documents that you see here are all hyperlinked. These are documents myself personally, and I'm sure many of our administrators have looked through, but personally have looked through all these documents, hundreds and hundreds of pages, looking at guidance documents and making sure that we understand those guidance documents as we develop our framework, to make sure that we're consistent with the mandates, that we're looking at the best practice recommendations, all those things that we're taking place. And we even going beyond that. We're looking at guidance documents from other states that will be opening school within the next week. We have many states in the South that will be opening school the first, second weekend in August. So we're looking at those guidance documents. What are they planning to do? And also reaching out to those colleagues and saying, what are you seeing working well, not working so well? So we can use those best practices, either things that work well, things that didn't work well, to help guide our process here at Shenandoah. So I share that with you, that this is an ongoing thing. It's not a one and done, because we're not in a one and done state. Things are, quite frankly, just still very much a fragile situation, and we'll see what the governor is going to say in August. And based upon that, we will make adjustments again to move forward, because the bottom line is we always need to move forward as a system. So I share all that with you who are listening, to know that your support, your input, your involvement, be it indirectly through your questions, directly if you're at the table having some of these smaller conversations, all those things are equally important. So I don't want anyone to think that, wow, my suggestions are falling on deaf ears. Nothing is falling on deaf ears. In fact, Mrs. DeFiciani just sent a note to me. We have over 20 pages of questions, and we're combing through those pages to eventually come up with a comprehensive Q&A document. So you as employees, our parents, anyone can know, here are the things, here are the issues, and here how we are looking to address those as a system moving forward. So I appreciate the time of my colleagues who joined us. Again, this is day 2 of long sessions that we've been doing, but worthwhile session, because it's important that people know and understand that all hands must be on deck. That's a priority for us. It's all of us together in this, because Shen is truly in, and we all have to be together. So I thank you for the questions that people have submitted. Many of those questions were already addressed in the Q&A in the presentation. A lot of those questions will be addressed in the Q&A to come. A lot of those questions will be addressed in the one-on-one conversations. And a lot of those questions will be addressed once we have a comprehensive plan and the respective principals and administrators start to having those engagement with faculty and staff at the building level as well. So more to come. This is an evolving process, and one that we're committed to do our very best to ensure that we uphold our standard, our commitment to excellence as a school district. So again, I thank you for your time. I thank you for your attention. But more importantly, I thank you for the professionalism that you bring to the table every day that differentiates Shen as being a great place to work and a great place for our students to learn. So thank you very much.